Okay, let's take a moment and talk about some great card games. I love card games because they can be played after a long day when you don't have a lot of time, which in day-to-day life is pretty common. Or they can be played in between two heavier games as a little bit of a mental break, and they're also accessible to more people. So card games, I think, is a must for any collection. So, I'm going to get into some. Now, first of all, I do want to mention I'm not going with the vibe that I just mentioned. I'm not really going to be including deck builders or any kind of collectible card game. Those I feel like would have a list of their own. If after the video is over you're interested in purchasing any of the games I mentioned, I do have some links in my description. If you do use those would help me out. Number 10 is a pretty simple game. I believe this game could even be played with children. I'd probably say still 8 minimum if you wanted to play with kids. Still fun if you're just going to play it with adults, and that is Karuba the card game. This is a German-made game that focuses on building pathways for adventurers and your personal deck to get to their matching by color temples. So every player has their own personal deck, only different by the color on the back of the cards. All of the cards are the same in every deck that each player has, and they build pathways to connect adventurers to their temples. Now, this can be a little bit difficult because you do have to keep in mind the orientation of the cards because you can't move them around. You have to keep them in the orientation where the number is in the top left corner, and this can make it difficult to be able to make a pathway that an adventurer can get through. You also have to keep in mind that you can't block yourself off, because if you were to, for example, have the purple adventurer go to the purple temple, but the orange adventurer is in her way, that doesn't work either. So you have to be very careful in how you place your cards. While this is a personal game and that everyone has their own little personal space and personal pathways, there is a competitive element because every single turn you are going to play 2 cards from your hand. The player who has the lowest value of cumulative cards must discard one of them and not use it. So it could be that some players have longer pathways than others and more of a chance to earn points because someone has to keep discarding cards and not use them. So that competitive element is also really interesting. If you can make your pathways long and have more diamond and gold along them, you earn more points. So it is one of the point-scoring card games. At the end of the game, the person with the most points for both connecting adventures to their paths and also putting gold and diamonds along that path wins. It is a fairly quick, simple game, so it's 15 minutes long on average and can be played with a large age range. So for that, I really do recommend Karuba. Number 9 is a cooperative card game, and if you followed my channel at all up to this point, you know that I'm a huge fan of cooperative board games, so of course I'll have a couple cooperative card games in this list. So it is Mini Diversity, or Diversity, however you want to pronounce it. And in this game, you are working as a group of divers on a team, so either all win or all lose, to preserve a coral reef. So at the end, if you win the game, the coral reef becomes a national park and is protected from corporations that are looking to exploit the natural resources around. So the corporations in the game are dumping oil, they are building hotels, and they are dynamite fishing. So they are basically making a lot of the species in the coral reef go extinct, and you kind of have to save enough species and convince the government to make it a national park before it is basically destroyed as an area. Now, there is an interesting element with this cooperative game because it's a card game where I've never seen this in any other card game, and I thought it was really interesting to where in your cards, you have your own personal hand of cards, but you don't get to actually see your hand. All of the players around you know what's in your hand, but you don't. One of the player actions that can be taken is you can tell someone else what's in their hand and they have to remember it. In your hand, you have a bunch of species card. When you play a species card, you have basically one more step towards saving that species. So it kind of is useful to know what's in your hand, but the idea is like since you're diving around and I don't really understand. I'd have to read the rules again to understand why, but for whatever reason, you're not able to see what you have yourself. You win the game as a group if you're able to save the amount of species that you choose before the game, before the corporation runs the area into extinction. I do like this because you're able to choose the complexity level you want. So if you're a newer group, you can choose a much lower complexity. It was much harder than I thought the first time I played it, so that's what I would recommend. But if you were to play it enough to get good at it, you could up the complexity to a higher level. Number 8 is a really pretty and relaxing card game, until it's not, and that is Arboretum. So I say relaxing until it's not because the species of trees they include in this board game are very beautiful, and you're building a pathway, and it's just really relaxing while you're playing, but at the end the scoring is a little bit brutal when you are scoring your Arboretum against your opponents, so that's where it gets pretty competitive. So you're building a pathway of trees where the numbers on the cards are building up consecutively. You, at the end of the game, will end up scoring this Arboretum depending on different pathways that you have that begin and end with with the same species. So, I mean, there could be other species in between, but as long as the pathway starts and ends with the same species, you can count it up for points. Now, the interesting thing with this is it's not only important what you play on the table for your personal Arboretum to make these pathways, but it's also important what you keep in your hand. And this is where you can have a little bit more of like the deception type thing where you're trying to figure out what the other players might also have in their hands, because you can only score points if you happen to have more remaining points in your hand from that species than your opponent. So you are being a little competitive on what you can even count at the end of the game. So this is kind of more, it is simple and relaxing, but you do have to keep in mind both what you lay on the table and what you keep in your hand. Number 7 is a card game I've loved for a while, and it's all about flipping houses and making money. So that's a theme that, appeals to a lot of people, and that is For Sale. For Sale is a great family weight game that is played in 2 phases and can definitely be played in 30 minutes or less. And the first phase, you are buying properties. Everyone's given the same amount of coins to bid on properties, and in each round, and there's many rounds that are played, you put out the number of properties equal to the number of players playing the game, and then you either have the option to pass on bidding, in which case you would take the lowest value property and keep it, or you would bid to get a better property. Now, these are important decisions because it doesn't really matter so much if you get the best property. What matters if you can make the best profit off of it. And that's how we get into phase 2. After phase 1, all of the cards that you bid on and won that have properties on them now become your hand that you hide away from the other players, and you go into a selling phase. When we're in the selling phase, it works a lot like when we're in the buying phase, but instead we have another deck of cards that have numerical values on them. And what you'll end up doing is the number of cards in the center is equal to the number of players you have around the table. Everyone chooses a property from their hand, which is now hidden from their opponents, and play them simultaneously. The best property gets the highest numerical value, all the way downward to the lowest property getting the lowest value. So choosing when to play your cards based off of what money is available in that round is really important in order to win the game. I'm a big fan also of card drafting games, and they definitely need to make the list. So for my number 6, I'm going to go with my general recommendation, which would be Sushi Go. It talks about it as a pick and pass card game, but it is also known as a card drafting game where basically everyone is dealt a hand, but you will only pick one card from the hand you're dealt. You play it down on the table in Sushi Go and you pass the hand along to someone else, and you keep picking cards from these different hands that are getting passed around. The whole point of it is you're looking for different combos. In Sushi Go, there's several combos you can get that can get you points, and you want the better ones. For example, if you get 2 tempura shrimp in this game, you get 5 points, I believe. You get 3 sashimi cards, you get 10 points. You get different combos, they give you different things, and there's also things like you can put the nigiri type sushi in wasabi and triple their point value. So when you're passing around these cards, you're trying to hope that you're able to get these combos. People can take the cards from you before you're able to get them, so you kind of have 2 strategies. One is figuring out what you're going for and trying to get those cards from all the hands as they're being passed around. And there's also taking cards that you know other people need so that they can't get what they need to score their combos. It's really fun. It's really simple. The artwork is really fun, and I really like it. You can definitely teach this to a younger group if you needed to, and it could really make a good family weight game. Now, while I would recommend Sushi Go for most people, I also know that some people would prefer a card drafting game with a little bit higher complexity And for that, I'd recommend Fairy Tale. This is the same type of thing where you're drafting cards, passing around the hands, but there's a couple things beyond Sushi Go that this has. For example, you can hunt opponents' cards so that they can't play them. There's cards that allow you to do that. There's also these story-type goal cards that are hard to get, but if you were to play your cards right and really work on it, you probably could get it by the end of the game. In some cases. And it also has this mechanic of flipping and unflipping cards, so you might throughout the game be flipping your cards over and then you don't get the points or the benefits of those cards unless you're able to flip them back, and you only count the points that are flipped face up. So if you want a more higher complexity card drafting game, I would go with Fairy Tale. If you're looking for more of a family way, I'd go with Sushi Go. So number 5 is my favorite competitive trick-taking game. If you don't know what a trick-taking game is, it's one where everyone plays a card and one person wins that little round or that trick. You've probably played them before if you didn't know what they were called. My favorite is Scheming and Skull King. So this is the copy I have, which is Scheming and Skull King. They ended up changing it when they made the new additions to just be Skull King, which I honestly think is a little bit better. Comes off the tongue a little bit easier. This just happens to be the copy I have. So Skull King would be the same game. And this is a really fun trick-taking game because it doesn't really matter if you get a bad hand or if you're dealt a bad hand, because that's not what the game's really about. The game is about being able to understand how good or bad your hand is and guess how many tricks you will take in that round. In the first round, you are dealt one single card and you decide if you're going to take 0 or 1 tricks, for example. You tell that before that round starts, and you only get points if you're right. In subsequent rounds, we play 10 of them, you get 1 extra card, so in round 2 you get 2, round 3 you get 3, so on to round 10 where you have 10 cards, and you have to guess a lot more precisely on how good your card is and how many hand is and how many cards or tricks you can take. There's cards that help you either take tricks more easily or avoid tricks. The Skull King card basically beats everything, but we also have pirate cards that beat most things. We have the black trump suit that beats all the normal suits, and then we have the 3 normal suits where it's just lowest numerical is lowest, highest numerical is highest. With all of those cards, you're able to try to manipulate how things lay so that you can get your bet. There's also cards called escape cards that allow you to lose a hand no matter what, so if you're not losing enough hands, you can use those. So for the competitive trick-taking game, I definitely would go with Skull King. I do also have one more that I would recommend and I like if Skull King doesn't sound like it's for you, and that would be Diamonds for a competitive trick-taking game. This is the same thing where there's multiple suits. If you can follow suit, you have to. But the game isn't about winning the most tricks, it's about putting the most diamonds both in your showroom and your vault and having the most diamond points at the end of the game. One thing that's interesting about this is each suit has a power that you can do. If you win the trick with a suit, you get to use that suit's power to accumulate diamonds. But one element I really like about diamonds that I don't know if I've seen in any other trick-taking game, is if you cannot follow suit and you have to play a card that is off suit, so if someone leads in hearts and you have to play a spade or something like that, you also get to use the power of the offsuit card you used. So you have both the advantage of winning the trick, and it's also an advantage to run out of suits, so you're constantly playing offsuits and using those suits' colors, or powers. So Diamonds is really fun, kind of gimmicky, but at the same time super fun, so you can check that out too if you're into competitive trick-taking games. Number 4 definitely shows off both my nerdy side and my evil side. It's a dungeon crawl card game, which is awesome. That is called Boss Monster. Now just check out how pixelated it looks. It's kind of the theme is of an old pixelated video game, and I just kind of love the aesthetic that gives. But beyond that, you are playing as an evil boss monster in your own dungeon. All of your opponents have dungeons as well and are playing as different bosses that you are basically randomly given at the beginning of the game. And you create dungeons using trap rooms and monster rooms. Now the ideal is you want to be able to make a dungeon that both has enough treasure to be able to attract heroes that you ultimately want to kill, but you also not just want to attract them, you want your dungeon to actually be deadly enough to kill them. So that balance in the game actually becomes a little bit difficult and ends up being the thing that I focus on the most. You win the game when you either accumulate 10 souls by having 10 heroes fail to get through your dungeon, or you can lose the game automatically if 5 heroes wound you by getting through your entire dungeon unharmed, or not unharmed, but alive. If you love dungeon crawler card games, Boss Monster is my favorite and very fun. You get to act a little bit evil and come up with little evil tricks and tactics, so recommended. Number 3 is a fun family weight card game that changes while you play it, and I kind of like the chaos of the change, which is why it ranks so high up for me, and that is Flux. There are lots of different themes with Flux. I happen to have Fantasy Flux, but you're likely to find a theme that you'll like. I'll just display some on the screen. I think I'd be interested in getting the SpongeBob Flux, just because I feel like it would kind of fit that show. Anyway, you start off with one rule, and that is you draw a card and play a card every single turn. Eventually, someone's going to play a goal card up at the top, which everyone will see, and that is the current goal and the current way to win. So if you were to complete the goal, which usually involves collecting a bunch of characters known as keepers that you play in front of you, you win the entire game. However, the way to win the game is constantly changing because anyone could discard the current goal and change it with a goal in their hand at any time. So it's going to change as the game goes on. Not only will the goal and the way to win the game change, but the rules that you have to play by when you play the game also change. Like I mentioned, one rule to start, draw a card and play a card, but there are rule cards that players can add on to the rules until the rules become very complicated. There's also rule cards that cancel out previous rules, so the game is just ever evolving and changing, a little bit chaotic but super fun. And then you also have just action cards where you can give yourself advantages or sabotage another player. The game's unpredictable and can be a little bit cutthroat, so I wouldn't play it with people who get their feelings hurt easily, but it's easy, super fun, and pretty quick. Number 2 is Lovecraft Letter, and yes, horror is great and Cthulhu does appear. This is actually a form of love letter, which is a lot more common. You might have heard people talk about love letter or played love letter yourself. I just really like this theme because not only is it Lovecraft and Cthulhu and lots of creepy stuff within the cards, but you also have another element to the game that just adds another dimension, which is insanity. So in this game, everyone is dealt one card, and during your turn, you draw another card and you have to play one of those. These cards are useful because they can help you knock other players out of the game or give yourself other advantages. There are multiple rounds in a game of Lovecraft Letter, but the way to win a round is either to be the player with the highest numbered card at the end of the round, or find a way to get all of the other players in the round kicked out so you're the last person standing in that round. There are different cards that allow you to knock people out. For example, some combos that would do that is the number 1 is an investigator, and basically you would play the investigator down the table, number 1, and then you would pick a player and guess what number card they have in their hand. If you're right, they're knocked out. Another card would be the professor in number 5, where you force another player to discard their hand. And there's also cards, like the Necronomicon, where if they discard that from their hand, they automatically are knocked out of the round. So there's different weird combinations that can get someone knocked out, and you could also try to hold higher cards in your hand if possible, even though some cards will try to get those out of your hand. It's chaotic, and it's a lot based on luck, in all honesty. There's a lot of luck to this game. There's some strategy, but you have to be okay with having some chaotic luck in your life. But it's just really fun and thematic and cool. Now, the element that this has that Love Letter does not have is the idea of insanity. So there are sane cards where you play normally. They're not as powerful, but they're also not as risky to use. And then there are insane cards, which is where a lot of the cool artwork comes in. And on these insane cards, you have the ability to use more powerful abilities with these cards, but you also have to do a sanity check at the beginning of every turn you take. If you fail the sanity check and prove to be insane, you're automatically knocked out of the game. So you get to win this game by either winning 2 rounds sane, so you basically never use an insanity card, or 3 rounds in the insane route. There's also a third way to win, where if you're able to play the Cthulhu card after already playing multiple insanity cards and surviving multiple sanity checks, you just win the entire game, even with just that one round being the only win. It's fun. It's chaotic fun, a lot of luck, and just really beautiful in the way that I see beauty. Number one for me is probably a lot of people's number one, and that is The Crew. The Crew is a cooperative trick-taking game, which when that was pitched to me, I didn't understand how that would work, but it definitely works. Thematically, the idea is like you're traveling with your crew, which is the people that you're playing with cooperatively, through the solar system to discover the 9th planet. I've noticed that like the theme definitely works for people who like theme and like going through and reading that flavor text, but also if you're someone who's not super into thematic games, you don't need to be to like The Crew. So it's a great game to bring together different types of gamers at the same table. This game has 50 missions, so it's not really a card game that you would likely sit down and play in one sitting. I'm sure someone has done that before, but it'd be something that you do in multiple different nights. But you can stop at any mission, so that's not really a problem as long as you feel like you'll be playing with that group again. It has 4 different colored suits, yellow, green, pink, and blue. And then it has 4 rocket cards that kind of function like trump cards, but you don't have to use them if you run out of a suit. You get to choose when you use them. The person with the 4 rocket card becomes the commander of that mission, and the group tries to work together to make the mission work out. For example, the first mission, basically you draw one of these tiny little cards that models all the other cards that in the larger deck, and you need the commander to win that card. That generally be pretty easy. Depending on how the cards are, it could be a little complicated, but usually that first round is just to show you how it works and how everyone's trying to work together to make this work out. Later rounds become more and more difficult. For example, there's one round where the 1 of each suit, which is the lowest card in the suit, needs to win the trick. So you have to come up with these like out of the box ways of making that work, running people out of suits, using different methods. So it kind of melts your brain after a while when the missions get more and more complicated and you're trying to make certain things occur with the tricks. But it is really fun. The thing that also makes this hard is you can't tell, even though it's cooperative, you can't tell other people what's in your hand when you strategize. You have to come up with ideas and strategies without just giving away your hand because that would be cheating. But there is one element where you can communicate every single mission, except a couple where you can't, but you know. In general, you can communicate. And the only thing you can communicate an entire mission is one single card. You put that card on the table and you can only tell people if it is your highest number in that color, your lowest number in that color, or the only one you have in that color. You cannot communicate that you have a rocket, you can only communicate the suits, but this information, when everyone plays a card down and communicates throughout the round, is really useful in making sure that the missions that have to be won, the different tricks and the different weird things that you need to figure out how to do as a team, while still following the rules of a trick-taking game, happen. So the communication is definitely essential. And one thing about this game, too, is since you're playing it over multiple nights, you have like this little logbook where you keep track of how many times it took you to complete each mission, and in that way it can be kind of competitive against other groups, and if they could complete it quicker, or if you could complete it quicker. So there's that, too. So try something new and pick up The Crew. That was not on purpose. That's it for now. Let me know what your favorite card games are down in the comments. Give this video a like and consider watching my other board game videos. Bye!